And that's the interesting thing about going through a period of depression is that people around you, they don't really know how to help you because you don't know how to help you. And it's very difficult for you to ask for help when you are unclear on what is the exact type of help that you desire. And that's where I was when my husband found out about today's book. Today, I want to share with you a resource that helped us improve our marriage by what we say is at least 1,000%. I honestly feel like JP and I wouldn't be together right now if it wasn't because of this book. If it wasn't because of the things that he learned in this book, the things that he was able to help me learn about myself through this book, and the things that actually help us see ourselves with compassion and with grace as we learned about expectations. Hola, mis amores. If you are catching us on the podcast, on audio, whether it be it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I want to encourage you to head to the show notes and grab the link for the YouTube channel so that you can get the whole YouTube experience and the whole podcast experience. You can catch the visuals and you can see the things I'm also sharing to help you really capitalize on these tools. And while you are on YouTube, remember to subscribe to the channel so you could be the first to be notified when a new video drops. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, make sure that you leave us a 5-star or a 6-star review, letting us know that this podcast is supporting you. One of the things I am extremely fascinated by and passionate about is self-mastery. And in my journey to self-mastery, I've spent quite a bit of time and energy and resources into learning about human nature, what it means to be a human, how do we show up as humans, what are the things that being a human can teach me in order to experience the human experience and live in a way that is in alignment with my ease and my flow. And it wasn't always this way. I actually remember when I was going through depression in 2016, and those of you that have been with me since that long and even longer, remember that I went through a very intense period of depression in 2016 after my favorite uncle was murdered back in Honduras. And during that period of time, I was in a really dark space. I was in such a dark space that I didn't even know how to show up for myself, let alone how to show up for other people. And there is a specific incident that comes up for me when I think about that time. And it was at the top of 2017 when my husband and I were having a meeting. We were having a meeting at the top of the year to talk about our goals, to talk about what we wanted to focus on in the new year. And I had my video up and I shared with him, I asked him while we were looking at our Trello board, which was being casted on our TV, I asked him, hey, what do you think is going to be the biggest thing holding you back this year? And he looked at me and he said, you. Now, I was not prepared for that to be the answer at all. Because to be honest with you, I didn't even realize that he had those thoughts about me. And that incident began to open the door to a number of things that I wasn't aware that were going on in my marriage. After that conversation my husband and I had, which I took very much personally, because I was like, what do you mean I'm the weakest link? What do you mean I'm the reason why you won't be held back this year? I was so in my bag about that for weeks, actually, maybe even months. But what happened as a result of that is that my husband and I began to have conversations about how we can support each other. After that incident happened, I want to say maybe a few months later, we had another conversation, and he told me in that conversation that he wanted me to show up for him in a different way. He wanted me to be at the type of partner that can challenge him and that can hold him accountable and that can help him grow. And I remember looking at my husband and thinking in that moment, you want me to give you something I'm not even giving myself? How am I going to give you something that I don't even have to give to myself? And it was that moment that turned things around for us in our relationship, because it began to allow us to look at ourselves differently. And in that process of looking at ourselves differently, my husband began to ask himself, how can I support my wife? How can I show up for this woman in this season of her life? Because I knew I was going through depression by then, but he didn't really know how to help me. And that's the interesting thing about going through a period of depression, is that people around you, they don't really know how to help you, because you don't know how to help you. And it's very difficult for you to ask for help when you are unclear on what is the exact type of help that you desire. And that's where I was when my husband found out about today's book. Today, I want to share with you a resource that helped us improve our marriage by what we say is at least 1,000%. I honestly feel like JP and I wouldn't be together right now if it wasn't because of this book. If it wasn't because of the things that he learned in this book, the things that he was able to help me learn about myself through this book, and the things that actually help us see ourselves with compassion and with grace as we learned about expectations. We didn't realize this back then, but expectations played a big role in our marriage. And when we began to open ourselves up to explore how we were showing up to expectations, things began to change and we began to show up differently. We stopped arguing about the dishes, which was a big point of contention for us. We stopped arguing about the things that we said we were going to do and weren't doing. And we started to understand that we were looking at expectations from a different perspective. And that helped us grow a partnership in a way that was rooted in compassion, in love, in kindness. And it actually helped us set the foundation for what is now going to be our 9th-year wedding anniversary. And today, I want to share this book with you, and I want to share with you how it has helped us and how you can also utilize it. So let's begin. So today's resource I want to share with you is a book by a woman named Gretchen Rubin. When this book entered the equation of my life, I was going through a really dark time. I was going through depression. I didn't know who I was. I felt really lost, disoriented. I was feeling really frustrated with myself because I didn't really know how to change. And that was having a huge impact in my marriage. That was having a huge impact in my partnership. And it was also showing up in my career, in my role as a director of communications. I found myself taking things personally a lot and I didn't really know what was going on. And I also didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth to go find out just yet because I was so deep in what I was experiencing. I was diagnosed that year with transitional depression. And when you're going through depression, it just feels like this cloud that is following you around everywhere. And that's kind of how I felt. I felt like there was this dark cloud following me around everywhere. And I had no idea on how to shake it off and how to let go of it. And this is actually how I ended up going to therapy because I wanted to understand what was happening with me, what was happening with my human nature, and begin to show up differently. In that process, my husband started to ask questions about how I could show up for him. He started to ask questions around how I could be more supportive to him. And he made it really difficult for me because, to be honest, I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't really know how to show up for him in that way. And that's why today I want to talk about this in the Yenory Pouncil podcast, because I know that there are listeners here that are in partnerships that desire to show up for their partner. There are listeners that may be going through depression themselves and they desire to have resources that can help them. And the resource I want to share with you is really one that has helped me tremendously. It has helped my clients. And we are getting ready to read this resource together with the members of the Subject Society as part of our new book club called Robes and Reads. So let's just jump into what this resource is and talk about how you can utilize it in your own life. Today's resource is called the Four Tendencies. And it kicks off a segment I'm going to be doing on the podcast, or a mini series I'm going to be doing on the podcast once a month, called A Book Worth Reading. So the Four Tendencies is by a woman. Her name is Gretchen Rubin, and it looks like this. If you are catching us on the podcast on audio, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I want to encourage you to head to the show notes and grab the link for the YouTube channel so that you can get the whole YouTube experience and the whole podcast experience. You can catch the visuals and you can see the things I'm also sharing to help you really capitalize on these tools. And while you are on YouTube, remember to subscribe to the channel so you could be the first to be notified when a new video drops. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, make sure that you leave us a 5-star or a 6-star review, letting us know that this podcast is supporting you. So the Four Tendencies looks like this. I'm going to hold it up so y'all can see it. Boom, there it is. And this book focuses on how do we show up to expectations. And specifically, it answers the question, how do I respond to expectations? Now, this was a question that I began to ask myself in 2017 when my husband brought this book home. And when he brought this book home, I wasn't in a position to receive this resource. I'm going to be honest with you. I was going through a really dark time emotionally. And when you're going through a difficult time emotionally, it's very challenging to be available to tools to help you because you can't see past your pain. You can't see past your suffering. And the people that are around you have a very challenging time supporting you because they don't know how to help you because you don't know how to help yourself. At least that's the space where I was in. And when my husband, his name is JP, when he brought this book into the house, I had a lot of resistance towards this book. For a long time, I didn't want nothing to do with this book. And the more he read this book and the more he started to say things like, Gretchen says this and Gretchen says that, the more it triggered my resistance. And the more I was like, this woman don't know me. She don't know what I got going on. She got nothing to teach me about myself. Like, stop saying Gretchen says this, Gretchen says that. I was just in my bag heavy. And it was because I wasn't available yet to receive it. And in reality, what I was doing was embodying the very same behaviors the Gretchen talks about here in the Four Tendencies. And that's why I want to bring this up for us because when I think about the books that have really supported my journey in healing and healing with joy, the Four Tendencies at the top of the list. This was perhaps the first book that I read that opened me up to how I was acting versus how I thought I was acting, which is something that I talk to my clients about a lot. So, The Four Tendencies is essentially a personality profile book. And this personality, let's think about it as a personality quiz. And this personality quiz focuses on answering one question: how do I respond to expectations? This is different than some of the other personality type or personality quiz type books I've read, which I've read a bunch of them. It's different than the Strength Finders, it's different than DISC, it's different than perhaps even the Enneagram, it's different than what are the ones that's coming to my mind right now? The five love languages, in the context that it focuses on answering one question only, and it looks at a very specific part of ourselves, that is expectations. And when you take the quiz, there's a quiz that you can take, and I'm going to share the link to this quiz on the show notes so that you can take it and you can let me know what is your tendency. When you take the quiz, it tells you what is your dominant tendency. There are four tendencies that are part of this quiz that you can get as results. And it's important that you know that you actually have a mixture of the tendencies. You have a dominant tendency, and then you also have other tendencies as well that you show up as. We all show up in some of these tendencies. We all have these tendencies. It's about which ones are the loudest for us. And this is why this is so important, because when you understand how you show up to expectations, you can show up in a way that is in alignment for you. The number one thing I'm passionate about is living life with joy, healing ourselves with joy, especially as Black women. We've been through so much in our lives. We have learned a lot about what it means to show up powerfully. We tend to wear a cape where we want to rescue everybody. We tend to want to fix everybody's quote unquote problems. We tend to do this often at the expense of ourselves. And what I know to be true is that when you are willing and able to see yourself clearly, you can begin to show up in a way that is aligned. You can have the courage to take off that cape of trying to save everybody. You can have the courage to say no to others so that you can say yes to yourself. You can be in a position where you can show up to yourself without feeling guilty and feeling shame for putting yourself first. In this particular book can help you do that. And it can help you do that in a way that feels aligned, that feels peaceful, that feels yummy, that feels good to you. And that's what I really desire for yourself, because that's what I've been able to do for myself. And this tool has helped me tremendously. So I want to talk to you through what are the four tendencies and how do they work together. The first thing I want to share with you is that, like I shared, there are four. The one is called the questioner, one is called the upholder, one is called the obliger, and one is called the rebel. I want to give you a little moment so that you can head to YouTube and in the comments below this video, share with me which tendency do you think I am? I am going to share my tendency before this video is over, but I want to hear from you as someone that's been listening to the podcast. Which of these four tendencies do you think I actually am? Which is my dominant tendency? The way these tendencies work, there is quite a bit of overlap between them, and I'm going to show you an image of these tendencies in a second. You have the questioner, and the way that the questioner looks at expectations is that they resist outer expectations and they meet inner expectations. That means that they are willing to do something if you can convince them why. But if they are not trying to do that, they're not going to do it. Their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why. Then you have what's called the upholders. The upholders meet outer expectations and they meet inner expectations. That means that the things that they expect themselves to do, they can make themselves do those things. The things that other people expect them to do, they can also make themselves do those things. Now, for the questioner, the things that they desire to do, they can make themselves do those things. And the things that other people desire for them to do, they will do it if you can convince them why they should do it. For the upholder, their motto is, discipline is my freedom. These are very disciplined people. And sometimes discipline, which is something that a lot of people talk about desiring, could be a double-edged sword. Because depending on what you're being disciplined about, it may serve you or it may not serve you. Then you have the obligers. The obligers, they meet outer expectations, which means they can do the things that other people want them to do. And then they resist inner expectations, which means that they are not able to really do the thing that they desire to do. Their motto is, you can count on me, and I am counting on you to count on me. And I'm going to go deeper into each in a second. And then you have the rebels. The rebels, they resist outer expectations. So they're like, other people, whatever people want them to do, they can't make themselves do that. And they also resist inner expectations. Whatever they desire themselves to do, they can't make themselves do that either. So the motto for the rebel is, you can't make me and neither can I. Now, the first thing I want you to know, now that you have gone through all of these, before I even say that, let me show you a visual of this. Those of you that are with me on YouTube, you can see this. You can see an image of this breakdown directly from the book. If you're not with us on YouTube, grab the link from the show notes and head there so that you can see this visual and you can see how these work together. Because there is overlap. As you can see, the questioner tendency overlaps with the upholder tendency and the rebel tendency. The upholder tendency overlaps with the questioner tendency and the obliger tendency. The obliger tendency overlaps with the upholder tendency and the rebel tendency. And the rebel tendency overlaps with the questioner tendency and the obliger tendency. This is really important because no tendency is better than the other. One of the things that I began to experience when I found out my tendency, I started to think, do I have a good tendency or a bad tendency? In the reality, all of us experience these tendencies in some shape or form. And when you know that, you can focus on harnessing the power of your tendency and utilizing the parts of your tendency that stretch you to help you move through those challenges with ease and with grace. And when you find out what your tendency is and you learn about it by going through the show notes and grabbing the link for this quiz, you'll be able to see yourself from a different angle. And that's what happened to me, because my husband's tendency is the questioner tendency. So whenever I will bring something up to my husband, I always felt like I had to have a case ready for him. You always have to be like, hey, can we do this because 1, 2, 3, and 4? And he'll be like, nah, I don't feel like do that. And now I got to come back and rebuttal and I got to convince him. And it was really exhausting for me to go through that process because I felt like, why can't you do the thing I'm asking you to do? Why I gotta keep on asking you to do the same thing over and over again? And I gotta explain myself and I gotta convince you to do it. And that was really frustrating for me. It was frustrating because I could see him wanting me to do the thing he wanted me to do. And when I would bring up something to him, he wouldn't want to do it on my time. He wouldn't want to do it when I wanted to do it. And you can see how that will cause some conflict in our relationship. You can see how that would cause a lot of discomfort in our partnership because we weren't seeing eye to eye. We were operating out of our expectations of one another. And one thing I want to share with you about marriage and partnership, having been in my marriage for now, it's going to be 9 years this year, having been with my husband since 2011. So it's going to be what, 13, 13 years this year, I believe. We've been together for quite some time now. Expectations are going to be the thief of your joy in your marriage. If you have expectations of your partner, that has the power to steal your joy. Because when you have expectations of people, you aren't available to seeing them for who they are. You aren't available to how they are showing up so that you can meet them where they are. You are looking for them to show up in the way you expect them to show up. And when you're looking for people to show up in the way that you expect them to show up and they don't, that can cause quite a bit of issues in your partnership. That can lead to arguing about the dishes, which is something that my husband and I, in our first year of marriage in 2016, we used to argue about the dishes a lot, y'all, because I grew up in a household where we were always expected to do freaking dishes. There were always dishes to be done. I come from a big family. There were always things to be washed. And I was sick and tired of that. So when I got older, I began to develop a resistance towards doing dishes. You may even be able to start seeing what my tendency is. And because of that resistance, I didn't want to do the dishes. And he would be like, babe, can you do the dishes? And here's the thing, I would say, yes, I'm going to do the dishes. And he'll be like, when you going to do the dishes? And I would say, I'm going to do the dishes at this time and this date. And he's like, all right, cool. Can you believe that the day will come and the time will come and your girl will be like, I'm going to do them later. I'm going to do them on my own time. And granted, that will make him upset. That will lead to him feeling really angry about the situation because I said I was going to do something and I'm not doing it. And I couldn't figure out why I was having a difficult time not doing it. And he couldn't figure out why I was having a difficult time not doing it too. And it wasn't until we began to read the Four Tendencies, let me actually correct myself. It wasn't until he read the Four Tendencies that he began to understand that I was showing up to expectations in a way that he was being stretched by in a different way than him. That if he said he was going to do something at a certain time and date, he could do it. And if I said that and I didn't really want to do it, guess what? I wasn't doing it. And this is why this book helped us so much, because he helped us see other ways that that was happening. I had an expectation of JP that we would go to the grocery store on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. And he used to be like, why I gotta go to the store Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock? Like, what's the point of that? I pass the store all the time when I come from work. I can go at any time. I don't have to go with you. This doesn't have to be a us thing. But what he didn't know was that growing up, my parents, they used to go to the grocery store on Saturday at 8 a.m. So when we got married, I had that expectation that we were going to do the same thing. Even though he never agreed to that, even though I never asked him if he wanted to do that, I just assumed that. And I didn't even know I was doing that until we read this book and we began to look at what were the other expectations that we had of each other in our partnership that were causing conflict. Now, if you have not guessed by now, I'm going to tell you what my tendency is. My tendency is the rebel tendency. And that is the tendency of you can't make me and neither can I. So when JP was asking me to do the dishes, and I was like, yeah, I had all the intentions of doing the dishes. But what I didn't know was that underneath those intentions, there was an expectation to rebel against doing that because deep down, I didn't want to do it. And I couldn't make myself do something that I didn't want to do. Now, if you are listening to this podcast episode or watching it on YouTube and you have taken the quiz, I want you to tell me what is your tendency. And if not, pause right now, head to the show notes, grab the link, and take the quiz. It takes about 5 minutes or less. And let me know in the comments below, what is your tendency? Are you a questioner? Are you an upholder? Are you an obliger? Are you a rebel? Because knowing this information about yourself is going to help you tremendously with how you show up to relationships, whether they are romantic or platonic, to how you show up in your career, and to how you show up to yourself. For example, this is not my dominant tendency, but the obligers, because I work with a lot of obligers. And obligers, the thing that really supports obligers is accountability, because they rely on accountability in order for them to get things done. And that's why they are so good at having other people tell them what to do, because they are being held accountable by those people. Obligers tend to experience quite a bit of people pleasing because they're not able to turn that off. And there's something that Gretchen talks about in the book called the obliger rebellion. So if you're an obliger, if you're the person that is like, I could do something for other people, but I have a difficult time doing it for myself. If that's you, listen, first of all, I see you. I'm holding space for you because I have some of that energy too. What's important here is for you to understand that you can use that to your advantage. Once you know that you experience that obliger tendency and that you show up like that, you can begin to put accountability in place to help you show up for yourself. One of the things that my clients do when they hire me is actually do that. I work with a few obligers in my container because they desire that external accountability to help them show up for themselves. And once you have the external accountability and you put the habit in place, then you can continue it on your own. You are essentially rewiring yourself and rewiring how you are showing up so that you can align it with who you desire to be. There is a lot of power that comes from understanding how you show up to expectations, especially when you are in a season of shedding. I talked to y'all in the previous episodes about me going through a season of shedding in the last year, almost the last 2 years. And during that time, I was able to remember like, listen, my dominant tendency is the rebel tendency. I tend to resist this. I tend to fight against the things I don't desire to do. So let me focus on doing the things I do desire to do. If you are a rebel, it's important that whatever you are doing is the thing that you desire to do, is the thing that actually brings you joy, because you're not going to rebel against that. You're going to rebel against the things that you don't desire. You're going to rebel against the things that society is quote unquote making you do. And it's important to know this thing about the rebel tendency because I want to be honest with y'all and with myself. When you have the rebel tendency as your dominant tendency, one thing that can happen is you rebel against the things that are actually going to serve you. There are things that are going to serve you that you're going to start rebelling against because of your tendency to rebel. You're not even thinking, does this serve me? All you're thinking is, well, I don't feel like doing this. Let me rebel against that. It's not a conscious thing. It's more of a subconscious thing that is happening. And that's why this book was so powerful in my relationship with my husband, because it revealed all these ways in which I was rebelling to our partnership. It revealed all these ways in which I wasn't showing up in alignment. And I didn't even freaking know it, which is why I'm sharing this resource with you today, which is why starting next month in the Subject Society, we are going to kick off our book club, Robes and Reads. And this is going to be the first book we're going to read. Because when you are clear on how you show up to expectations, you can give yourself grace when you show up out of alignment. You can give yourself grace when you're not showing up in the way you desire. You can give yourself grace when you're showing up in the way that you say you weren't going to show up. And when you give yourself that grace, you can give it to other people. You can be kind to other people when they are not doing the thing they said they were going to do. You can be compassionate to them when they are feeling the shame and guilt for not showing up in the way they said they were going to show up. You can have kindness for yourself when you are taking their behavior personally. These are the things that JP and I were able to work through and learn through when we began to read this book. And in the spirit of being transparent, he brought this book into the house, and I believe it took me like 6 months to read it. Mind you, I am an avid reader. I could read a book quick. But in that time of my life, I wasn't open. I wasn't available to this information because I was going through depression. I didn't really know that this was going to help me. And I was actually heavy on my rebel energy because I was operating out of my conditioning. In the last episode of the podcast, I talked to you about confidence and I share with you the 4 stages of self-trust. And one of those stages is the shedding stage. And when you are in the shedding stage, like you experience something called the conditioned self, and you also experience what is called the iconic self, where the conditioned self is the person you have learned to be, and the iconic self is the person you are learning to become. And in my life, I was experiencing a period of time. Let me plug this in, y'all, because my phone is dying. I was experiencing a period of my life, a period of time where I was operating out of my conditioning, and my conditioning was saying, rebel, fight against these things, don't be open to new resources. My conditioning was saying, be sad, be depressed, don't allow people to support you. It was reading this, I was replaying these thoughts around, you're weak for wanting help. People that are strong can do it on their own. Why can't you figure it out? Those were the thoughts that were going in my mind, and I was replaying over and over again. And that's why I felt so lost and disoriented. That's why I felt so frustrated. And when I was finally in a position to open myself up, to shed those beliefs, is when I was able to read the 4 tendencies. And when I read the 4 tendencies, I understood myself. I saw myself clearly. I saw that maybe I wasn't crazy. I saw that there were some things about me that I wanted to address. And I understood that I had learned to show up to expectations in a very specific way. And for the first time, I saw how it was impacting my marriage. I saw that I did not want to argue about the dishes, and that there was a way for me to step into my partnership and shift out of those beliefs. And it gave me the opportunity to do this with a partner that was on board. I highly recommend reading the 4 tendencies with your partner. If you are married, if you are dating somebody, if you are serious about the person you're talking to, like, give them this book and invite them to read it with you, because they're going to learn a lot about themselves as well. And when they are learning about themselves, they are going to be learning about you, because you are mirrors to each other. And the things that they are stretched by when it comes to you are the same things that are going to help them grow. And one of the things I love about this book is that Gretchen has quite a few chapters where she talks about understanding each tendency. So each tendency has its own chapter. Then she also has chapters on how to deal with the tendency. So if you have an upholder partner or upholder parent, you can read about how you can navigate dealing with that particular tendency. This was a really powerful thing for me, because when I learned about the tendencies and I began to see, okay, how do I deal with my tendency? I learned about how I can talk to myself to help me journey it. I learned how I could show up at my work with my work. I learned how I could show up with my child. I learned how I could show up with my spouse. It's a really thorough resource. And at the time, I didn't have kids when I was reading this. I didn't have I wasn't working with clients in the way that I'm working with now, but he helped me a lot. He helped me a lot because he helped me see that there are times when I rebel for the sake of rebelling. There are times when I'm heavy in the energy of people pleasing. And when I'm in the energy of rebelling, I'm not available to learning. I'm not available to growing. I tend to be in the energy of overthinking. I tend to be in the energy of rejection. I tend to be in the energy of resistance. I tend to be in the energy of analysis paralysis. And that's an energy that's not allowing me to be emotion. I am fluid when I am in my highest self, when I am operating in full alignment. I am going with the flow. I am letting God lead me, and wherever God sends me, I'm going. And I'm going from a position of acceptance, from a position of love, from a position of surrender. Versus when I am on my rebel bag, I'm not allowing myself to see the things that serve me. One thing I enjoy about being a rebel is knowing that if I'm rebelling to something, it's because either I have learned that I quote unquote have to do it, which I can then decide, is this serving me or not? Or because I legit don't desire to do that. I have learned that when I am not rebelling, it's because I am fully aligned with what I am operating in. So it helps me show up in alignment with my highest self. It helps me look at my shadow and learn from my shadow from a position of power, from a position of joy. And this is why I wanted to bring this resource to y'all today, because You're going to hear me talking about it over the next couple of months as we're reading it with the book club, Robes and Reads. And if you want to join the book club, you can. There is a link below this video where you can join the Self to Society. And when you join the Self to Society at a Great for Survival level, because there are different levels in which you can join it, if you join it at the Great for Survival level, you are going to get access to the book club. And when you get access to the book club, you'll be able to read with us and discuss these things with us. JP may even pop in the book club session so he can talk about his experience from a receiving end as a spouse on what it was like to be with me as I went through this process. Because I know that y'all desire partnership. I know that you desire partnership, and not just partnership that's romantic. You desire to have healthier bonds with your parents, with your siblings, with your children, with your family members, with your colleagues, with your clients, with your business partners. And this is the type of resource that can help you tremendously in doing that. And it's really cool because when you start to learn more about yourself and you learn about your tendency and you learn about the framework, you can share with other people and then they begin to learn more about themselves. And you know what we are into here in the Yenory Pouncil podcast. We are all about igniting a chain reaction of transformation. And that can only occur if you are willing to open yourself up to resources like the Four Tendencies. So that's why I wanted to share this with you today and talk about it because it's a wonderful book. It's the book that really kicked off me looking at myself with uncomfortable honesty. It's a book that kicked off me taking radical responsibility for myself. And those are pillars that are non negotiable for anyone that's desiring to love themselves unconditionally, for anyone that is desiring to show up powerfully, and for anyone that is willing and ready to live a life overflowing with ease and with flow. And that is why today we are talking about The Four Tendencies by Gretchen and Rubin, and why I highly recommend this book to anybody that is in here that can really support you, because I want to give you resources that can support you. I'm looking at the chapter on rebels, and here's some things that I wrote down on the sidelines, y'all, for you to take away. And that is, allow yourself to choose to face the consequences. Let me tell you something. When you are on page 167 of this book, there's a section called How Others Can Influence Rebels to Meet Their Expectations. And there's a part that I want to read to you. A rebel always wants to think this is my idea. And in fact, many people have told me I manage rebels by making them think that everything was their idea. So, how do we work most constructively with rebels? In a nutshell, rebels respond best to a sequence of information, consequences, and choice. We must give rebels the information they need to make an informed decision, alert them to the consequences of actions they may take, and then follow them to choose with no lecturing, hovering, or hectoring. This, and I'm gonna show it to y'all right now on the video so you can see it. There you go. I think you should be able to see it like this. This section of this book, and you see my notes right there, this was transformational for me because this particular part of this book, and you can see all my other notes, helped me see what was the best way that I received the information. What was the best way that I was going to be able to get the information I needed and show up powerfully. It's important that I know what the consequences are. If you don't tell me the consequences, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get what you want. And even when you tell me the consequences, there are times when I simply got to go through it. I've missed train rides, I've missed flights, I've spent triple the amount of money to spend on things because I missed deadlines. And it wasn't until I began to see that, oh, I'm showing up in the rebel tendency, that I noticed what was happening with these patterns and I began to change them. I went from being the person that was like, I don't care about being on time, I'll be there when I get there, to being the type of person that now is committed to not only being on time, being there early, that's committed to wrapping up things early. That wasn't something that I had before. And it was because of my understanding of my tendency that I began to make those changes. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you are listening to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I want to remind you to come to the YouTube channel. There is a link in the show notes where you can head to the YouTube channel so you can see the visuals of today's video. You're going to be able to see what does it look like for the tendencies to work together. I literally just showed you a visual of how they overlap in a few notes that Gretchen makes in the book. And I'm going to be sharing more of these visuals with you as we go in through the months when we start reading this with the book club starting next month. So you want to make sure you are connected and plugged on YouTube and that you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you're the first one to find out about it. If you are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, head to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star or a 6-star review, especially if you found this episode helpful. And head to the show notes and grab the quiz link and take the quiz. And below the comments on this video on YouTube, let me know what is your tendency so that we can talk about it. If you're feeling like you want to read this book with us and you want to read it in community, there is a link in the description box, also known as the show notes, where you can sign up for the Self-Trust Society. And in there, you can sign up and join us at the Grateful Survival level. And that's going to give you access to the book club. We are kicking off this book next month. So if you want to read it with us, the time to join is right now. So in the next episode, we are kicking off our Dragon Ball and Spirituality series. I talk to you about my passion for spirituality and self-mastery. And I've also shared with you that I am an avid fan of Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball universe. And what I am going to do is kickstart this beautiful series where I break down spiritual lessons that we can learn from Dragon Ball. And in the first episode, we are going to talk about the 7 Dragon Balls. What are the spiritual lessons that we can learn from these 7 Dragon Balls and what you can take away with you to help you show up as the most authentic, the most amazing and powerful version of yourself in your life from something that I have been watching since before I can remember, since literally I was a little girl in Aguan in Honduras, that has served me so much. So I decided to share with you those lessons that you can take with yourself so that you can embody the highest version of yourself with a level of ease and flow. So I will see you in that episode. I think that's all I had for y'all today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being a part of the conversation here at the Yenory Pouncil podcast. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I appreciate you listening. I know there are endless things that you can do with your time while you are either folding your laundry or going on your run or walk, or maybe even driving to your next destination. And the fact that you have chosen to spend this time with us is something that I truly appreciate and I hold very dear to my heart. If you found this episode helpful, and if you're feeling generous, send it to a woman of the African diaspora that would also find it helpful, a woman that desires to have partnerships that are rooted in compassion and love, and a woman that is committed to loving herself unconditionally every single step of the way. Thank you for joining me, mis amores, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Hasta luego!